privilege to introduce our second keynote speaker to you, Dr. Alice Seal. Dr. Seal is the Associate Director of the Center of Deliberative Democracy at Stanford. Dr. Seal received her PhD from the Department of Communication at Stanford with a focus in political communication, deliberative democracy, and public opinion. Dr. Seal received her BA in Economics and Public Policy and MA in Political Sciences, also at Stanford. Her research interests are in deliberative democracy, including what happens inside deliberations, such as examining the effects of socio-economic classes in deliberation, the quality of deliberation. Okay. Dr. Seal has advised policymakers and political leaders from around the world and at various different levels of the government, including leaders in China, Japan, Brazil, and Argentina as well. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Dr. Seal to give us another keynote speech. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank the organizers, the sponsors, and all of you for being here today on a Monday. I now understand why Daphne put me right after Professor Abe, because after we go through the technical issues and then the business issues of energy, the next step really is to understand how are you going to convince the public? How are you going to communicate everything to the public so they can either support the digital grid or provide some alternative ideas? I didn't get it at first, but now I understand why I followed Professor Abe. So a bit of background, the Center for Deliberative Democracy, housed at Stanford in the Department of Communication. Our work revolves around a method called deliberative polling, which is a method of public consultation. And we use this method to engage in not only energy issues, but also issues of economics, education, healthcare, and we've worked in over 23 countries doing this, developed by James Fishkin, our center director, over 20 years ago. Wrong button. Nope, wrong button still. Come. Oh, okay. Oh, come on. Oh, okay. I will do that. So, just to give a little background of what the kind of foundation of deliberative polling is. So, stepping away from everything that Professor Abe just shared with us, when we engage the public, so when we have an idea like the digital grid, or when we have an issue that we need to solve about sustainability, renewable energy, if we want to inform the public, we try to do polls, focus groups, things of that nature. And Time magazine, at the turn of the century, did a poll about who should be the person of the century. So in theory, wonderful task for Time magazine to do. And you can all kind of think about in your head who would be who you would say the person of the century. So there are different categories. A statesman was one category. This is not the answer, just an idea for you to think about. Entertainer was another category. And scientist was yet another category. Time magazine found that of all the votes that came in, just one person, got the highest votes in all three categories. So I don't know if it's too early for you to do a Q&A right now, but you can think about who possibly could have fulfilled statesman, entertainer, and scientist at the same time. Any wild guesses? Any thoughts? All right, that's okay. I can tell you now. It's, oh, did you have a guess? Professor Abe? No, not Steve Jobs. I'm not sure if the attire would get him to be an entertainer. But It was Ataturk, the, some would say, founder of the current country, Turkey. So Ataturk was the result of this survey, not because he was the best entertainer, I'm sure, but actually it was because the people of Turkey, when they heard that Time magazine had this poll, they decided to mobilize all the people in the country, especially the children, to mail in postcards to Time magazine and vote for Ataturk. And this was so unexpected for Time magazine that Time magazine had to cancel and scrap the poll altogether. This is just an example to show that when you engage the public, and there are ways, and there are always methods to game the system to affect the results of the poll, this is what may happen. And I'm sure all of you have been subject or maybe even victims to this type of results. But this is one of the reasons why our center and James Fishkin developed the method of deliberative polling. Another example, more recent, I don't know if any of you watch or have watched the Colbert Report, now off the air, but at one point, Stephen Colbert decided to go put his name in to have a bridge in Hungary named after him. And in order to get his name selected, he decided to post a link on his website, make the announcement on his show, and what happened afterwards was he had millions and millions of votes, more than the people that lived in Hungary, vote for him, and he actually won. And the Hungarian government decided to say, no, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to speak Hungarian. Then he learned Hungarian, a few words, said it, repeated them on the show. And then the government said, not going to happen. You're going to have to be dead. So he decided to withdraw his name. Another example of how the public can be mobilized to take over something. And the last example, back in 1975, there was a poll done about the Public Affairs Act. And just like any other poll, it was done through a polling firm. People had their opinions about it. The results are not important. What's important actually is there was no Public Affairs Act of 1975. And this is one of the issues with public opinion polling. Most people are kind of embarrassed to share that they don't know something or they don't know something really well. And so when approached, even with a digital grid, for example, some people may say, oh yeah, I know all about that. It's great, it's excellent, we should do it. Even though they know nothing about the digital grid. And so, and more entertaining is that 20 years later, the Washington Post decided to do an unanniversary, did the survey again, and got the same results. So in additional reasons why our center does what it does, selectivity of sources. And nowadays, with the variety of information that is out there, people are really able to just engage in a very narrow view if they chose to do so. Read only Fox News, read only CNN or whatever it may be, and your views become, in theory, more narrow. You're only reading from certain sources. You're only getting information from a certain view. And it's possible that maybe why the US is so polarized. And other bit of information is that the opinion poll that we know as it today is actually a little different from the way John Gallup had conceived of it back when he did. He thought at the time that the Gallup poll would be kind of a snapshot of what the public opinion actually was. And at the time, there were only very limited media outlets, and it actually was indeed possible to conceive that one survey drawing a proper random sample, could show what public opinion is. But nowadays, we have so many different types of media and different mediums of accessing information, that the glimpses of information that we're getting from people is really not what the public is actually thinking. So because of all these reasons that I have talked about in example form, that's why we use deliberative polling. And the method itself, we compare it to other things that are on the market, so to speak. We have Time Magazine's example of self-selected opinion polls, kind of in this quadrant here, where it's self-selected and top of the head, just something you react to immediately. And the other quadrant, you have regular public opinion polls that you see every day, and it's still top of the head. You react to it. You don't really have time to think about it, but it is representative in the sense that if done properly, it can represent your public. And at the top here, the deliberative quadrant, you have focus groups and self-selected types of discussion, like our conference here. We're all interested in energy. We've self-selected ourselves to be here, so we're not exactly representative of the public. And lastly, deliberative polling would be in that quadrant where it's deliberative in the sense that we engage and we try to provide information to inform in a balanced way to the people involved, and we strive for it to be representative through scientific sampling. Now, what we do at the center, and whenever we get into a project, the first thing we ask ourselves is, who are we consulting and what kind of opinion are we looking for? And so as Professor Bailey in the beginning, he was suggesting, it's really about not what we're trying to do, but how we're trying to do this. So if we are to talk about sustainability, renewable energy, it's something so important to everyday lives, who are we actually consulting? Are we consulting just the consumers? Are we consulting all the stakeholders involved, environmentalists, your contractors, there's so many categories. And what kind of opinion are we actually looking for? Are you looking for just top of the head, may not be very informed opinion, or would you want them to be extremely informed, having sat down and thought about what their individual priorities are, and tell you that if given such information, they would do this. And if given another set of information, they would do this. And how does that help you, all of you in this room, to better your decisions? So the method of deliberative polling has lots of balanced information in the form of discussion materials, small group deliberation, time to engage with experts in a Q&A type session. We use scientific random sampling, control groups as well, and also pre and post deliberation surveys to track how opinion, if opinion, has changed. And a quick illustration of what the method, so it starts with the scientific sampling. The sample is chosen, we do the recruitment, and once the recruitment is done, the first survey is administered. Participants receive their discussion materials, and then they engage in the small group and plenary session over a day or a weekend, depending on how long is needed. At the end of the process, they complete the post-deliberation survey, and that's the completion of the entire process. And what we do after that is really study how opinion has changed, if it has changed, why it has changed. And the qualitative and the quantitative analysis we're able to do is really identify the levers of opinion change. Why does someone want the digital grid? Why does someone want wind power over nuclear power? And having these key points helps policymakers, helps governments, researchers to really grapple with providing the appropriate and accurate information that will help people make decisions that they need. And as I mentioned, deliberative polling, we've been in 23 countries, and this year we worked in Ghana, in the city of Tamale, to talk about very different issues, basic infrastructure projects. They were dealing with basic necessities, bathrooms, clean water, and we are next month going to be in Brazil talking about internet access and bringing internet to the next billion in the coming years. And in December, we'll be in the city of Ulaanbaatar, working with the capital city there to talk about infrastructure projects. And so now a bit more back to the topic of energy is we wanted to share about the recent project we did in Japan. It was a national project with our partner at Keio University, where at the time the government wanted to really understand what to do with nuclear energy and what the public wanted to do with nuclear energy. At the time, we were told that the government themselves, they didn't really know what to do, and it was more of wanting to do the right thing. They probably had maybe a preference, they didn't let us know, but they really wanted to know and have an engaged process with the public. And as such, we did a deliberative poll with them through Keio University. We had 285 participants participate in the actual deliberation. And we looked at the representativeness to make sure that they were attitudinally representative and also demographically. And there were 3 proposed energy options in the actual deliberation. So the government, through a commission, developed 3 options: 0% energy of nuclear energy, 15%, and 20 to 25%. And these materials that I'm sharing right now with you in the discussion, they're available on our website. You can see the entire discussion material that was used in the deliberative poll. So the 3 scenarios that the government put forth involved different percentage combinations of nuclear, renewable, thermal, etc. And the purpose of the deliberation was to really understand what the public wanted. Do they want 0%? Do they want 15? Do they want 20 to 25? And more than that, it wasn't that they needed to select just one option. It was really to understand what their view was towards nuclear energy and what they were hoping the future of energy would look like in Japan. Did they want anything to do with renewable energy? How far would they go? Would they put any more money out? What are they really interested in doing for the future of Japan? Some results: the 0, 15, and 2025. The blue is before deliberation. The red is after deliberation. It seemed actually their opinions for 0% increased significantly, but the 2 dropped. So they were very much in favor of a future with limited or no nuclear energy. And in looking at rankings about how they rank the different scenarios, we found that they still selected the 0% scenario as a priority rather than the 15 and the 2025. I'm simplifying a lot of this at the moment since we have limited time here. Another part of what we use in deliberative polling, aside from asking these scenario and policy-oriented questions, we ask a series of knowledge questions because we want to know that the participants who are deliberating, who are offering their opinions, actually have knowledge of what they're sharing. So we ask a battery of knowledge questions that we feel are pertinent to them making their policy opinions. And we see oftentimes increases in their knowledge, and you can see some of the increases here. Not everything increases all the time, but we do see a lot more increases. And we always ask evaluation questions to ensure that the participants are actually happy with the discussions that they've had. And we have very high marks in this. and people are actually leaving the deliberation feeling that their opinions are more developed, more clear, and they are able to understand these issues. We also ensure that the moderators themselves, because it is a deliberation, that the participants feel the moderators are doing a good job. One of the most important things is to make sure that they don't feel the moderators influencing them in any way. And we definitely saw that the moderators did a good job. And just to show you, there was a lot of coverage in the media in 2012 when this was done. At the time, at the completion of this project, the results were submitted to the government and was very well received. There were plans to move forward with the results. Unfortunately, later that fall in 2012, the government was no longer re-elected. And so with the new party in office, the results were not followed through as of yet. So things happened and things changed, but we were able to see on this occasion what the Japanese public felt about their future for Japan in terms of energy. And working with Daphne and her colleagues, we're looking to run 2 pilots in the near future on energy tariff and demand-side management. One in Guangzhou in China and hopefully one in Japan as well. We're likely going to be doing the pilots within a university to see what university students are thinking about these topics and to be able to see how they will grapple with these issues. Just to share, I know the focus of my talk was supposed to be about Japan and China, but having listened to Professor Abe and his talk, we did a series of deliberative polls in Texas, actually, in the early 90s, in the span of 94 to 98 or so. It was with 8 different cities and their public utilities commissions. At the time, the public utilities commissions, they had no obligation to consult the public, but they wanted to because they wanted to know what the public wanted to do in terms of what type of power they wanted Texas to have in those cities. And as a result of those deliberative polls, now at, I think it was about 2002, that time, as a result of our polls, Texas became the #1 state in wind power. And it was as a result of those public utilities commissions really listening to the public and knowing that the public wanted wind power. They invested in wind power. They put their money there. And not only that, there were questions within our survey that asked the public, how much money, how much more money would you input or would you pay per month if the PUC decided to invest in the power you wanted? And some people wrote in $1, $2, some even $10, but the commissions actually just increased their bill by 25 cents. And with that amount of money, they were able to invest in the wind power and make Texas #1 state in wind power. And so it was very interesting to see how different states, cities, countries approach their policies. And it's a privilege to be able to share these examples with you. Our work, in our work here at our center, we touch on a lot of different types of issues, and energy has been one of the most exciting ones because it is so difficult for the public to understand. And what we at our center like to offer is a platform for the public to get engaged and provide perhaps a broad direction for policymakers and for researchers, for governments, so that if they can at least say to you, I'm willing to sacrifice X to get to this future, then perhaps you will know what the next steps would be. So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Siu, for another wonderful keynote speech. Thanks particularly for introducing this very innovative and great method to us, and share a lot about the post-Fukushima energy decisions and how this deliberative polling methodology can be applied, and also share with us some of the prospects of introducing or applying this methodology in smart grid policy making or that other related energy policy making areas. Now, we have been managing time very well, so we still have, I think, 5 to 7 minutes for Q&A session with Alice. And then again, we will have another panel discussion later this morning, so we will have Alice with us later on, but now we have a couple of minutes. Any comments or questions? Very welcome. Yeah, that gentleman.
Thanks. Great talk. Thank you. I was interested in all of the things that you're talking about, but especially at the very end, you're talking about the poll in Texas. And in Texas, it seems like asking a question about wind power is very theoretical because you have nice big blue skies, and you're really kind of just thinking, what's the moral thing to do? But in Hong Kong, we have that same question about, would you be willing to pay more for wind power? And I've always thought that's the wrong question. And really the question would be, are you willing to accept all of the pollution that we have for a discount? Because it's really not paying more, it's are you willing to accept paying less for the pollution and the asthma and the hospital trips, because it's very real here. So I wonder how you would have attempted that when you have very obvious environmental issues that you could use instead of just kind of the broad theoretical issue.
I think that's exactly. I mean, you could potentially even ask that question. Are you willing to accept this very bad current state for less dollar amount here? And alternatively, putting in our surveys, we ask a number of different things, such as how much do you value clean air? How much do you value, you can even put in hospital visits, or having less illness, or various things into the bucket, and seeing how people would rate them, knowing that if they were paying a little bit more to perhaps get better air, better energy, or cheaper energy, or more expensive energy, whatever it may be, maybe new nuances would come about. I haven't lived in Hong Kong, but my parents live here. So I would imagine putting together the right battery of value-based questions to really understand, if people value money, how much are they willing to sacrifice for just paying $1? Are they willing to sacrifice 10 years of their life? If you put those in real terms in the appropriate briefing document, discussion guide, to say, if you only paid if you only paid for dirty coal, if you only got your energy from dirty coal, you would be looking at this 50 years down the line. And I think this is where this topic of energy is so complex, because there's so many components that it would be wonderful to be able to educate and inform the public in some manner so that they can really put the pieces together, and in a way for the public to tell you, now that I understand that if I only paid $1 for my energy, I actually lose X years of my life down here, I will choose something else. And that actually is what happens in other topics that we use. In Ghana, the one we just did, it was talking about clean air, clean water, having the city that they were in, they had not appropriate for the morning before lunch, but they would defecate in various places, not in bathrooms. And it was helping them understand that if they only made the effort to go to the bathroom, there would be the amount of illness would be less prevalent. in their area. So it was really putting things in perspective for them to really understand the difference. And I think it would be really useful in Hong Kong, especially to answer that question or to find the answer to that question.
You mentioned Japan in the poll. At that time in Japan, of course, after Fukushima, Japan had a very big renewable energy policy. For example, feed-in tariff for solar, 42 yen per kilowatt hour. A lot of my colleagues in Japan, they complain a lot about this policy. Because if you compare wind to solar, wind seems to be a better choice, but wind is not there. But solar got a lot of development, but the solar, they complain it could be too expensive. It's not the best choice Japan could get. So how this public opinions got into this decision-making process, how this entire thing got shaped, got into this political process, shaped the policy.
Yeah, so the results for this particular poll, it was shared with the government, and it was made public in reports by Keio University. But unfortunately, there was an election in the fall of that year, so the sitting government that commissioned the poll was no longer in power in the fall when they were supposed to implement some of the results. So that was the political issue faced. And I believe at the moment, the results are probably still sitting in a drawer somewhere. So that is the downfall of sometimes when we work directly with governments, the parties' politics change. But we hoped that at some point, when their views are a little different, they will pull out the report, or we get the chance to do another one to get an updated view of what the public thinks. But the opinions at the time when we did the whole, those are all available on our website, and all the materials that were used are all available on our website as well. So you can see, at least at that time in August 2012, what the viewpoints were, what the public was viewing, all these types of choices.
Thank you, Alice, for a really great talk. It was wonderful to think about these issues in conjunction with Professor Abe's talk. One of the things I was wondering about is how persistent are the, I mean, you mentioned that this was just right after Fukushima Daiichi, I mean, and it was done in 2012. I mean, how persistent have your polls been, and have you ever been able to go back in a few years later and see how these opinions change?
Mm-hmm. Great question. They are persistent. Unfortunately, we haven't been able, not for any project have we been able to go back a few years later for financial reasons. We have gone back to certain projects 6 months and a year later, and the opinions do persist. They often drop a little bit, but they never drop below what they were before deliberation. So if before deliberation they were, on a 10-point scale, a 7 on something, and then after deliberation they were at a 9. The follow-up that would be done 6 months or a year later, they may be at an 8, and they would never drop below pre-deliberation.
我直接说中文啊，我想问一下，这个文化和体制的影响对你的调查应该是有很大的影响，所以你这个模式是不是都适合于这个用在各国？比如说日本的调查，我是觉得还是有偏颇的，所以政府要否定它。
So, I think that in terms of culture, and whether we've done this in 23 countries, including in mainland China, and I don't think that culture or the level of sophistication of a population that has much to do, because we've been very successful in a number of countries. In Ghana and Uganda, when we were doing ours, the illiteracy rate was very high. Education was very low. In China, the towns we work in have about 10% illiteracy rates. So that is not an issue. Rather, it's the issue, what you were just saying, implementation and actually making the results real, and having the governments and policymakers execute. That is often an issue. However, in other countries, when we work directly with the government, and directly with policymakers, it is oftentimes that they do follow through and make the implementation a success. So it's in this case, unfortunately, on such a prominent project that there was a change in the elections in the party. But I'd be happy to talk more about the examples in China, too.
Thank you. Please join me to thank Dr. Siu once again for the great keynote speech and all the discussion that followed. Thank you. Now, I'm very happy to announce that now this is our first coffee break, and we have been working very well on time, so now we still have 15 minutes for our coffee break. So our next session will come back again at 11:15. So please come back on time. And the next session will be more on the experience on Korea and Japan. And then we also have a panel discussion. Okay? Enjoy your coffee and refreshment. This is being served outside in the lobby. Thank you.